Folks, we just had a very interesting game drop on the Japanese PlayStation Store, which it should be coming out to the West very soon, but that is Cloudberry Kingdom. And this game is very special because it came out in 2013 on PS3, 360, and PC, so definitely a later lifecycle game for its time back then, but it got native PS4 and PS5 versions, and also a special PS5, PS3 Emulation edition. So the studio that did this game, RedoApps, they are an emulation studio, very similar to Implicit Conversions, for those that saw that interview with Bill when we went over the challenges of emulating games and releasing them commercially. And so RedoApps is a very similar studio in that nature, and they have their own proprietary PlayStation 3 emulator. It's not RPCS3, but what they did with this game is do native ports, and if you transact on the PS Store, you are also allowed a separate executable, and that is the PS3 edition of the game. So you can see right here on my main home screen, I have two PS5 versions, Cloudberry Kingdom and then the PlayStation 3 edition. The PS3 edition is only for PlayStation 5, so you can download PS4, 5, and the PS3 edition on PlayStation 5. We will launch it right away. And this is the first PS3 emulated title on PlayStation 5. You can see right now we're already in the emulation container, so it says before you play, the game was made for a DualShock 3 controller, so start and select are mapped to the touchpad. And it wants us to do this thing where we hit start, select, and options, and that's going to now launch the game. So there we go, RedoApps. And this is really cool. So I just thought we had to immediately check this out, play it as soon as we can to check out the first PS3 emulation title, especially because this is like, I think, the second game I ever reviewed on my channel all those years ago. It was a very, very long time ago. Good Lord, the audio is very loud, excuse me. I have a lot of things going off right now. Hey, Cloudberry Kingdom. All right, so it does have some save states. No, this is the menu. Right, we can save state. So we can save here. Cool, we do have save states in their emulator. Load it from there. And then settings, language options, we have that. You can see the game's pushed up into the top right for the state that it's in. Help, let's see what's going on there. Nothing much, okay. Redo. No redo checkpoint available. Use the create redo point option. All right, I'm assuming that's going to be a rewind. Create a redo point right there. Processing in slot 7. All right. So now if I go to level 4, well, here's our standard menu. If we bring up the rewind menu, redo, we can go back to that. So it's not quite a running timeline. Are you sure you want to proceed? Can't be undone. Loading. It takes a little bit. So we do have Digital Foundry's Richard Ledbetter speaking with both of the co-founders about this relatively new team and their Redo Engine emulation, which is a suite of PS1, PS2, and PS3 emulators. And so for the PS3 portion, one of the co-founders did confirm that it has no relation to the existing RPCS3 emulator, and they did give this quote here where they say, "It's tough to compare directly to RPCS3. They're a community-driven emulator with 10 plus years of development time and countless testers, so they can easily tell you how many games run, how well, and what issues they have. While we do aim to do broad testing, you can imagine that it's hard to match community-driven testing. Furthermore, in our case, the emulator was built with commercial intent in mind. Because of that, we've gone the HLE route, and since Sony made save states mainstream in their emulation, we've also included redo states. While we do aim to have our emulators compatible with as many games as possible, development will be tailored to each title we work on." So HLE emulation is basically high-level emulation. It's still looking for broad compatibility, but it's not really dialing it in quite to the degree of LLE, so that's low-level emulation. And so PlayStation 3, a platform that heavily leans into the SPEs, or at least that's how Sony designed the PlayStation 3 architecture. You have a general processing element, and then you can offload various tasks to the SPEs, and that's how you can optimize developing PlayStation 3 games. But that's what makes the console so difficult to emulate because of its asymmetric, multi-threaded architecture. And so That's kind of what the co-founders are getting into there, and certainly for being fiscally responsible. I mean, it's so timely that we had that interview with Bill over at Implicit Conversions, and that they still have to be fiscally responsible about how they emulate certain games. Of course, there's a myriad amount of issues when it comes to licensing and certain things that may or may not be in the game, and who even owns the IP at that point. And though with IP that are so old, they're primarily doing PS1 games, and then that gets into PSP and PS2. But the older an IP is, the more problematic it is in that sense, the IP part. But there's still a core technology area that they have to be mindful of. And so when we're getting into the conversation of like, okay, if there's a bunch of licensed cars in the game, if there's licensed like Adidas and things like that in the game for a sports title, they might be able to remove those textures. But if they're everywhere in the game, at a certain point, the kind of resources that go into it, it's not worth it, because they still have to sell the game, and there's a cost basis, there's revenue sharing, there's work for hire agreements. Every game has to be judged in a different manner for if the game is financially viable. PlayStation 3 in this case, I mean, these games are more recent, sure, so licensing might not be nearly as difficult as games that are, upwards of 30 years old, but PS3, as I've said for how long on this channel, presents a technology concern. Even though these games are absolutely, you can emulate them, it's possible. RPCS3 is incredible, what they've done for a community-driven emulator. The argument I always made was, the second you have to start monetizing these games, when it's commercial and it goes through QA and cert and, yes, the licensing, it becomes substantially more difficult. And in this case, too, I mean, this is a fairly modest game, and it still doesn't have, I mean, they're not doing a PlayStation 4 version. You can see that the save states and, well, there's no proper rewind just yet. I mean, it seems like it's still very, very early days for RedoApps and their emulation efforts, so I don't want to be too harsh on their PS3 emulator right away, but I mean, you can tell this is sort of what we are building up to for years now at this point, and they say they've been working on this emulator for years anyway, so that's what it takes. And we have another quote from one of the co-founders about how, yes, the AAA stuff is going to be an issue. So when speaking about the PS3's exotic SPUs, they said, quote, "About the SPU, we agree it's likely to be a nightmare when it comes to AAA games and how they used it. For that, we're using a hybrid approach where we HLE SPU functions to avoid expensive and unnecessary back and forth and various timing issues. To give you an example with Cloudberry Kingdom, its SPU usage is limited to audio and video decoding. When emulated, that's a very expensive operation, so we hooked those calls and replaced them with native console implementations. As a matter of fact, we've actually completely disabled the SPU for this release." Yeah, so another thing we can mention immediately is that there's this line going through the background, and this line sort of jitters above the Cloudberry character, which is definitely a byproduct of them trying to emulate this game. And it runs at 1080p for the PlayStation 3 edition, where it's going to be a very crisp 4K on PlayStation 5. But I kind of love that they put out this, still somewhat experimental, I mean very experimental to be clear, version of the game that you are allowed to launch and play. So that's actually pretty cool. It's worth actually checking right now, trophies. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure the game has regular trophies. No platinum for the PlayStation 3 version of the game. Let me just hop right in real time to the PS5 native version and check out that trophy list. Based on trophy triggers, that might also be different as well. So the game's launched. Check it out. Yeah, okay, so different trophy triggers as well. So it has a platinum, and they're able to do a little bit more by way of that. Not sure if that's simply an issue with the... it's so cool. It doesn't even say PS3 edition on the trophies. Okay, so... yeah, it's just straight up, they, for some reason, can't do a Chapter 1 trophy. I don't know, it's fascinating to see how that, how they're doing that. Because that's the other thing with these, like, classic games, when they're running under emulation, Implicit has to find, like, specific trophy triggers based on the screen and the state of what they can track in the files when they sort of, like, do a cursory glance at the ISO or the disk image, however they're looking at the game. Almost always they don't have source code, by the way, so that's part of the issue as well. But this is fascinating. I mean, this is history. We are playing our first PS3 emulated title on PlayStation 5 from, kind of a new studio that I think a lot of people didn't realize popped up out of nowhere, but that's what can happen at times. Implicit's doing their own PS3 emulation. They're working with somebody for that project as more of a back burner thing. And Implicit they're the ones that primarily supply the PS1, 2, and PSP games through PlayStation Plus Premium, but that's not stopping any other team from doing this. And so here we go. We have one that's commercially available, but I mean, you can sort of see what we were building up to and what it takes. So Cloudberry Kingdom is like a fairly modest game. It's the AAA stuff that will be a massive issue. And this is why I often say that when you're talking about the first-party titles, which I would arguably say are the most desirable ones, your Resistance, your Killzone, your MotorStorm, I mean, those games, first-party, they really leaned into the PlayStation 3's exotic nature, and they heavily utilized SPUs. They were a showcase back then, but that's a detriment to them all these years later. So it's going to be tough to probably do those games, but time and resources and certainly the desire for those games will hopefully get us there eventually, and it was really cool checking this out. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.